the ground shaking, but when that Leopard goes by, the very air I breathe is shaking. That's how powerful that engine is. So the first vehicle in the before. Of course, the cannons got a little bigger, and muskets were replaced with rifles, uniforms were updated, but wars were very much fought the same way hundreds of years. And that changed during the First World War, or the Great War. It was the first time in the early 20th century where mechanization, automobiles, were starting to have an effect on the battlefield. And what we see here is a 1915, so think about that. It's over 100 years old, this truck, a 1915 Model T Ford. And you can see on the door there, it says WD, that's for war. Now, unlike in the Second World War and conflicts later, and this is one of the vehicles that you can see at our ride station. We actually give rides in these here during our events. This is an M113 APC, or Armored Personnel Carrier. It doesn't have a main weapon. There is a mount on top with a crew commander that you can see sitting out of the hatch. The crew commander can have a 30 caliber or 50 caliber machine gun. But the vehicle is not designed like a tank to fight other tanks. This vehicle is designed to protect the crew inside. That's why it's an armored personnel carrier. And these were, there's different variants of these from the Second World War in the 40s and 50s, but this particular one came out in 1960. Just in time for the Vietnam War and deployment force in supporting NATO missions and peacekeeping missions for the United Nations around the world. There's often situations in when a tracked vehicle or a tank is the wrong solution. So Canada looked to a Swiss company called MOWAG and got a license on the design. Much larger, much faster. This is the Canadian-built LAV-3, or Light Armored Vehicle Generation 3. And these were built at the end of the 1990s, whereas the ABGV was designed in the 1970s. And it is an 8-wheel vehicle rather than a 6-wheel vehicle. And this is one of those examples. This LAV-3 you see coming around was built in 1998 and then went back into the factory and came out in 2008. And this is the LAV-3 RWS, or Remote Weapon System vehicle, known within the Canadian Armed Forces as the Nanook. It's much heavier than the LAV-3 and has technology that was developed from the army. Just because it's armored, just because it's tracked, just because it has a weapon on it, doesn't make it a tank. As you know now, there are armored personnel carriers and other roles for those armored vehicles. But now let's look at actual tanks. Here we see the iconic M4 Sherman. I think when people conjure in their mind, just say the word tank with your eyes closed. You probably see the Sherman. It's so iconic here in the West. It came in many, many variants. It evolved from 1941 to 1945 and beyond during the Second World War. And what we see here is actually an EZ-8. It's one of the late 1944, 1945 variant. It's one of the final evolutions. Because this is the only running Centurion in Canada. Canada, like many of the Western Allies, used the Shermans in the Second World War. They were built in the United States, but a lot of them had Canadian components. the United States and Canada had a joint war effort and war production. But in 1977, Canada was looking, in the 1950s, Canada was looking for a replacement for its Shermans. And in 1945, with all the lessons of the Second World War, the British were trying to come out with a tank that would be bigger and better than the Tiger and the Panther, the German super tanks of the Second World War. And what they came up with was the Centurion, but they came up with it too late. It never got to the battlefield in 1945. And then once again, the concept is, imagine this was designed for fighting a Tiger tank. It has the heaviest armor. It has a 20-pounder main weapon. That's 84 millimeters. We have a 76 millimeter gun on the Sherman that can take out anything, but we have an 84 millimeter main weapon in the Centurion. This is the one that I said made my chest vibrate with the air. The engine is so powerful, and you can hear that. It shakes the air around it. After the Second World War, when West Germany was brought into the Cold War, the Germans weren't done with tanks after the Second World War. There was design after the Panther, if the war was successful,